Welcome back to Bad Things in History, where we've been bringing you, the smartest viewers on YouTube, twisted history for over 3 years now. Our series exploring the worst and mostly forgotten events of the 1970s continues. As we enter the last half of the decade, our attention turns to 1976. It was the year that the United States celebrated its bicentennial. Natural disasters, accidents, murders, and massacres would leave their mark on an otherwise celebratory occasion. Many of the victims would not live to tell the tale. Let's begin with one of the deadliest earthquakes in recent history. 1976 Guatemala Earthquake. The most powerful earthquake ever recorded was in Chile on May 22, 1960. The Richter scale is used to measure earthquakes. The maximum possible rating is 10. The Chilean earthquake scored a whopping 9.6. Guatemala would be rocked by its own earthquake on February 4, 1976. It struck a little before 3 a.m., which meant that most people were asleep. The ground started shaking violently, and the entire event was over in less than a minute. That short time was long enough for death and destruction to spread throughout most of the small country. The epicenter of the earthquake was near the town of Los Amates. It was determined that the event reached a magnitude of 7.6. It affected an area of over 30,000 kilometers, which included Guatemala City. Many of the houses in poor areas were constructed of adobe. Nearly all these homes in the earthquake destruction zone were demolished. Additionally, roads all over the country were covered in debris. In some cases, streets were torn in two by the earthquake. There were 23,000 people killed in the disaster. Another 77,000 were injured. For those that survived, life was not pleasant. At least 1.2 million people found themselves homeless after the earthquake. President Che Garcia immediately requested assistance. The United States military brought medical supplies and food. They also helped rebuild many of the roads. Canada and Belgium participated in the recovery efforts as well. Escambia High School riots. The 1970s was a time of rapid societal change. Not everybody was willing to accept new realities. Escambia High School is in Pensacola, Florida. Originally, it was an all-white school that did not allow minorities to attend. But in 1969, it was forcibly desegregated. Black students and white students had to attend classes together. The school mascot was modeled after a southern plantation owner. Also, at football games, the school band liked to play the song Dixie, which was a popular Confederate anthem during the Civil War. The football team was also called the Rebels. African American students were not very happy about being forced to support a racist mascot and endure offensive songs, so in 1972, protests began. At the same time, the matter was taken to federal court. On July 24, 1973, a U.S. District Court ruled that the school couldn't use racially insensitive imagery. However, the decision would not stand. On January 25, 1975, another court overturned the previous ruling and said that the school board should oversee these decisions. On February 4, 1976, an election was held at the school. Students were asked to choose between keeping the existing mascot and other Confederate imagery, or choosing a new name for the football team. The majority of students voted to eliminate the old mascot. The name of the football team was changed to Raiders. The next day, a group of white students began protesting the decision. Hundreds of them appeared in front of the school and tried to erect a Confederate flag on the school's flagpole. Black students inside the school saw this happening and decided to interfere. The result was a riot which lasted for over 4 hours. 30 students were injured during the violence. 4 were shot, though they survived with injuries. Police occupied the school and finally ended the riots. In 1977, a final court decision was handed down concerning the use of Confederate imagery. Escambia High School would not be allowed to use the name Rebels for the football team. It was changed one more time to Gators, which is still the name used today. Bradford Bishop. Sometimes government employees are not very nice people. Bradford Bishop was born in Pasadena, California on August 1, 1936. He graduated from high school and earned a bachelor's degree of science from Yale University. In 1959, he married his girlfriend from high school, Annette Wace. Together, they produced 3 children. Bradford supported his family by serving in the United States Army. He was trained in counterintelligence and spoke at least 5 languages fluently. But he was ambitious and wanted more than the Army could offer. After leaving the military around 1968, Bradford began working for the State Department. He was sent to postings all over the world for the next several years. In 1974, Bradford was living in Bethesda, Maryland with his wife, their 3 sons, and his mother. During the day, he worked at the State Department headquarters in Washington, D.C. Bradford Bishop spent the next 2 years working hard. He wanted to earn a promotion and prove his worthiness. But on March 1, 1976, he learned that the government wasn't going to give it to him. Bradford told his secretary that he wasn't feeling well and left the office. He drove his 1974 Chevrolet station wagon to a bank where he withdrew several $100s. Then he went to a hardware store and purchased a shovel and pitchfork. Bradford finally arrived home a little before 8 p.m. Upon entering the house, he killed his wife. He then waited for his mother to return from walking the dog and killed her with a blow to the head. Then he walked upstairs and killed his 3 sons while they slept. After ensuring that everyone in the house was dead, Bradford took the family dog and drove away. It was March 10th before neighbors finally called the police. On March 18th, authorities found his vehicle at a campground in Elkmont, Tennessee. It was near the Appalachian Trail, which is where investigators think he went after abandoning the car. He was indicted for murder as well as several other charges, but Bradford has evaded justice so far. Authorities have never been able to find him. Fullerton Massacre. Most people who committed mass murder in the 1970s did not escape punishment, but that was little comfort for victims and their families. Edward Alloway was born near Royal Oak, Michigan, sometime in 1939. As a young adult, he began to exhibit serious mental problems. At one point, Edward tried to kill himself. The attempt failed, and he spent a month in a mental institution. After finding freedom once again, Edward Alloway married his first wife. In 1973, the pair moved to Southern California, but the happy relationship wouldn't last long. His wife divorced him just days after they arrived. Edward began having delusions after she left him. He thought she was posing for pornographic pictures and sleeping with other men. Eventually, he left the relationship behind. Edward moved to a place near Fullerton. He married again and spent some time traveling around the country with his new bride. When they returned home, Edward began working at California State University. He was hired as a custodian for the library. Meanwhile, his delusions began taking a serious toll on the new marriage. Edward firmly believed that his co-workers at the library were creating pornographic films which featured his wife. At one point, he even threatened his spouse with a knife over it. She responded by divorcing him on May 31, 1976. On July 22nd, Edward Alloway finally lost whatever remained of his sanity. He took a semi-automatic .22 rifle and traveled to the university. He entered the library through the basement around 8:30 a.m. Then he quickly began enacting revenge. First, he opened fire on 3 people in a secretary's office. He killed 2 and wounded another before moving on. Next, he entered the hallway and fired at the graphics department located at the opposite end. He killed 2 people in that exchange. 2 fellow custodians who worked with Edward then attacked him and tried to get the gun from him. One of them was killed by a shot to the chest. Neither of them was able to take the gun. Edward escaped pursuing authorities and left the university campus. Then he traveled to a nearby hotel where his ex-wife worked. From there, he called the police and said, "I went berserk at Cal State Fullerton and I committed some terrible act. I'd appreciate it if you people would come down and pick me up. I'm unarmed and I'm giving myself up to you." They showed up moments later and took Edward into custody. He was put on trial and in 1977 was found not guilty by reason of insanity. At least 5 different health professionals diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. Edward is still confined to a mental institution. George Prince Ferry disaster. The Mississippi River is very wide. For numerous reasons, it's not possible to build a bridge at every crossing, so in various places ferries must be used to carry people from one side of the river to the other. As the river flows into the Gulf of Mexico, it becomes even wider, and as ferries carry people and cargo across the river, shipping traffic moves upriver. Some of the shipping vessels are very large, especially in comparison to the ferries. On at least one occasion, this arrangement resulted in disaster. The MV George Prince was a ferry that carried passengers from Luling to Destrehan. It was owned by the Louisiana Department of Highways. Early on the morning of October 20th, 1976, the George Prince began taking on passengers and vehicles. After the ferry was fully loaded, it left the dock and traveled upriver before turning to cross to the other side. Passengers on the ferry soon noticed that another vessel was coming right at them. It was the SS Frosta, a tanker ship out of Norway. Its destination was Baton Rouge, but the ferry was in the way. The captain of the Frosta saw the ferry. He tried calling on the radio but didn't receive a response. He used the tanker's extremely loud horn to get the attention of the ferry's captain, but that didn't work either. The George Prince had almost completed its journey across the river when it was hit in the side by SS Frosta. All the vehicles on the ferry were dumped into the river along with the passengers. As rescuers arrived, they were able to pull 18 survivors from the river. A professional dive team heard about the disaster and offered their services. They showed up less than 2 hours after the event and began swimming down to the wreck of the George Prince. The divers did not find any survivors. They did find 17 victims inside the ferry that drowned. Another 57 victims were found in vehicles on the bottom of the river. The George Prince was pulled from the river with a crane so that investigators could figure out what happened. An autopsy was also performed on the captain of the vessel. It was determined that the captain of the George Prince had been drinking alcohol. He was also severely fatigued. And he did almost nothing to communicate his intentions to other vessels when he began to cross the river. A bridge was built in 1983 which eliminated the need for ferries to carry passengers between Luling and Destrehan. What do you think about this uniquely troubling year in human history? Did we miss anything important? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you learned something new from this episode, then please do us a favor and hit the like button. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more horrible history in the future. We don't want to be annoying, but the fact is we're not making money from YouTube currently. It's not like our content is advertiser friendly. As a matter of fact, the cost to keep this channel running comes out of our own pockets. Given that fact, please be aware that we accept PayPal donations, have a Patreon, and even a merchandise store. Links are in the video description if you want to help support this ongoing experiment. Thank you for watching Bad Things in History.